Welcome, everyone. Good morning. We are so fortunate this morning to have two extraordinary thought leaders with us on the panel today who will make a very strong and data-driven case for why it's imperative that we consider our current cybersecurity approach. I think we have a lot of board members and CEOs who are thinking, we have a lot of information, what are we missing? I think you'll be pleasantly informed here. They will be focusing on the key element of how boards and C-suites can step up their cybersecurity culture necessary so that we can all protect our ROI. We will take questions from the audience, but we'll ask you to hold your questions until afterwards, and we'll ask you to queue up at the microphones that are presented here in the aisles, and I'll let you know when we're ready to do that. And we will also have copies of the presentations available through the RSA conference site in due course. So, without further ado, I'm going to ask Andre, first question over to you. Could you please set the scene for us? Just how big is the cybercrime problem, and why are CEOs and boards the most vulnerable to this problem?
Thank you, Dana. So let me head over to the PowerPoint for a second. I should preface this and warn you right off the bat, we're going to cover a lot. So unlike Dana, who's nicely soft and measured spoken, I'm probably going to talk a little bit faster just to make sure that we're covering all that we need to. So we're going to skip through some of these. So first and foremost, some of these statistics you've probably seen before. Cybercrime is now our third largest economy in the world after US and China. It's the most prolific crime, overtaking illegal drugs. What's worse, however, is that the size of the breach prevention problem, aka cybercrime, is not relenting, quite the opposite. We've seen some of these statistics. So Statista says 9.7% is the annual growth rate of cybersecurity, while cybercrime is growing at 15%, estimated at 10.5 trillion by 2025. The interesting part of this analysis is that we're happy to spend $7.9 trillion a year on cybercrime, while we're spending whatever it is, 300, 350, 290 billion per year on cybercrime. Now, we're not saying we should be spending $7.7 trillion more on cybersecurity, but we are saying that whatever we're doing isn't quite working. That's why we're here today. What exacerbates this picture is the fact that our industry profits are not catching up. So if you look at EBITDA growth, it's growing at about 13% versus cybercrime at 15%. So clearly, cybercrime is catching away from us. Okay, so allowing breach complacency, if you will, this whole idea of we're just going to get breached, in the boardroom is getting increasingly expensive. And so we have to start shifting some of our focus towards that breach prevention. Otherwise, that 10.5 trillion is closing in. What's worse on a per company basis is that obviously the average cost of breach is also increasing. So in the US, it's climbing up to 9.9 million per breach. In 2023, UK has climbed up to number 3. And on a per industry basis, it's not getting better either. Quite the opposite, the trend we're seeing is blinky lights are not saving us. Technology is not saving us. Healthcare, which is arguably one of the most blinky lights industries out there, has now for the 12th year in a row topped the highest average cost of breach across any industries at 11.1 million in 2023. So if you're the CEO, if you're the board chair, right, or if you're a C-suite member, one of the takeaways is you've got to start thinking, what is my proper breach prevention mechanism? How am I training my board, my C-suite, and taking it down through the employee ranks? But you still may ask yourself, well, why does this matter, right? What's the average probability cost of breach? Will I actually pay this? And if you're looking at the statistics, we're looking at about 37.5% probability of getting breached in the next 2 years. I don't care whether you stick with 2018, 2019 numbers at even 30%, that's pretty darn high. So if you're the CEO or if you're the board chair, you're kind of looking at this analysis and saying, I've got 100% probability adjusted chance of a, right, 9.9 million times your probabilities of breach, $4.2 million hit to my P&L in the next 4 years. Again, that's average. Also, that's just above surface breach costs. It doesn't include any of the reputational damage or customer contracts loss or revenue loss, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're also not getting much better at discovering the breaches, right? So in 2021, we had 212 days to discover a breach. 2022 data shows 207. Okay, great. So that said, that's what we think is the amount of time we're under attack for. But what we're really under attack for is years out. IBM has a great chart that shows you what the high data regulation industries look like in terms of cost payout over years. And it turns out that only about 45% of that cost gets paid for that breach in the first year, with everything else spread out. So if you're the CEO, you're going to be dealing with this problem for quite some time unless you handle that from a breach prevention perspective. And so further, I'm going to put my former investment banking hat on. If you're the CEO, or if you're the CFO, or whatever, right, finance committee chairman on the board, you're looking at this and saying, my contingent liability has just been triggered. So I need to be willing, if I'm not doing proper breach prevention training or proper breach prevention mechanisms, I need to be willing to put a contingent liability for that $1.8 million hit, or 2.1 if I'm in healthcare, on my books for the next year. Unless I can mitigate that with proper breach prevention and show to the board that I am doing that. And again, that's just above the surface costs. We're not including beneath the surface costs, which there's a wonderful study out there says can be as high as up to 30 times that $9.9 million. So why is breach prevention not a CISO's problem? All right, I think we've all wondered that. At the root of these cyber breaches are not, as it turns out, cyber insecure technologies or CISOs not doing their job, but rather cyber insecure behaviors that lead to social engineering. And so therefore, cultures of cyber insecure behavior and indeed, right, CEOs, boards, and investors that allow, or in some respects, also enable them. Even Jen Easterly has said in Munich last year, ultimately cybersecurity is not about technology. It's about people and situating them in a proper culture, et cetera, et cetera. And in her recent interview with Katie Couric, said what we've been saying for the last 7 years, which is cyber risk can't be delegated. It's not the job of that IT team over there, it's the purview of CEOs, boards, and business leaders. Now, Dana's also hearkening to another question, which is why exactly are CEOs and boards the most vulnerable? Well, think about it. You've got access to everything. Breach you get access to everything. And what's worse is one of the statistics out there is hackers get up to 70% of the information they want from you within the first hour of attack. Again, I don't care whether it's an hour, 2 hours, 2 days, whatever it is. Unless you're doing proper breach prevention, you are within that hour incurring all of the costs for the next however many years. So breach prevention becomes very important. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Andre. So with that uplifting message of in a conference full of tech, no, thank you, Andre, for making the point that that the EBITDAs and the investments are not keeping up with the pace of the actual cybercrime. So I will turn to Mark to help us understand the cyber threat landscape and why exactly, when we're investing in so much firewall and cybersecurity technology, does the problem continue to grow? Why isn't tech
Dana,
enough?
so thanks everybody for coming this morning, because for those of you who've been to RSA year over year over year, a lot of the talks are technical, old school firewalls, IDSs, new school AI, all the blinky light things. And we're not saying don't invest in that. Absolutely, you still need to do that. It is a technology problem. We need to fight technology with technology. But as Andre just showed, we got to do more. I mean, we can't just have blinky lights. The criminal element that's out there largely has evolved into two groups. There's one that is opportunistic. They'll just spray the internet with all the malware, and it could be phishing, could be emails, could be drive-by, whatever. And if one of your employees falls for it, they got a toehold. But if a CEO or a board member falls for it, they've got a lot more than a toehold. Just think about the access that they have. And so if I do the whale fishing, you've all heard that term before. If I can catch a whale, that's a whole lot better than a little shrimp or a mackerel or something at the bottom. But does your senior leadership understand that? Do they know that they as individuals can put you at risk, that they as individuals are targeted? by the criminal element. And it's not so much that just scatter the stuff out there and see who picks it up, but can I get a board member? Can I get a C something or another in a title? The other group is espionage. And this is from business espionage all the way up to national security style stuff. And those two groups often are indistinguishable in terms of the technology they use, but who they're targeting and what they're going after is different. Criminals tend to be value oriented, so they can get money from you, hold you in ransom or so forth. The IP theft people tend to be more silent. You may not even know they're there. And they're trying to go after trade secrets, patents, inside information, blueprints, floor plans, whatever they can get. But they also recognize that the weakest link in any organization is the senior leadership, because oftentimes they feel that they are not the ones that have to do the dirty work. I train my employees. They do their annual security exam. We send them those fake phishing messages once a month just to see who clicks on it. We do the awareness training during October Cybersecurity Awareness Month. But me as a senior leader, I'll just go play golf, while everybody else does their training. And I'm being kind of general here, but I think everybody understands what I'm saying. So if you're in that CSO or CISO role, you certainly have a big influence over your organization, but the people that are above you, the financial folks, the other risk managers, the marketing and the board and so forth, they have to be part of this. And that goes back to another point Andre said, and I'll give it back to Dana, and that's the culture. I'm retired military. For those of you who are former military or current active duty, understand this concept of command climate. The person at the top sets the tone, whoever that is at the top. And over time, the organization tends to adopt the tone or the climate of the person in charge. So if the CEO, him or herself, isn't setting a tone of security, the troops, the employees, whoever down below you will not, they'll do as they're told, of course. But if it's not part of the organization, they're not going to take it serious. And I've worked with lots of organizations, as many of you have too, and you can see the difference. If you got that leadership buy-in at the top, if they're completely aware of what's going on, and they understand their individual personal risk to the organization. Not just saying as a leader, I need to make sure the organization is secure, but that I myself am secure because I am a target. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. So.
Thanks, Mark, for helping us understand how to set the tone. And Andre, I'd like you to pick up on that and build on that about what you think about culture and why that's the key here.
Yeah, so I'll actually speak from the perspective of a former also chairman and CEO who did get breached. After a very illustrious investment banking career, a lot of security mindedness on my board, and we still got breached. And so when we sort of started unwinding that, we said, oh, wait a minute, this is not a technology problem. We had all the cybersecurity technology we could have and a phenomenal CTO. And so when you start thinking through that, you're starting to say to yourself, ooh, we really are walking into a problem that we do not fully realize. And part of that problem is a culture ethos set by the board chairman and CEO, right? In some organizations, you've got the CEO controlling the board chairman controlling the C-suite. You've got to understand which culture you're in, but you've got to start with the person that's controlling that agenda. And then the next one, right? Whichever one of the two that is, and then all the way down. So that starts there. The second part is, as part of that culture ethos, you've got to fight some of these typical issues that we see, right? Board chairman or CEO saying, yeah, I don't have the time. Well, you better have the time now, or you're going to be paying for this for however many years to come. Or, I don't have the budget. Well, you either have the budget for breach prevention now, or you're looking at millions thereafter, right? Which is it? So there are some rhetorical questions that need to be asked. I'm not techie. Well, I wasn't either. I learned cybersecurity enough to know what the heck building that kind of a culture requires. So that's no longer an excuse. I don't have right, that it's that person's job. It's the CISO's job, or I'm just a board director. What do you want from me? No, that doesn't fly anymore because every board director and C-suite executive actually has a very well-defined cyber role, whether they know it or not. And it's fairly detailed. We'll get into that in a second. Then there is that complacency. Will get breached. If you've got a board member like that on your board, be very wary and do not bring that person on board or retrain them or ship them out, right? One of those three. Danger zones, individuals that think they know it all, right? CISO thinking that they know it all and they control cybersecurity of the organization, or the CEO thinking that we're covered because our CISO's got it. Those are some serious danger zones that if you see that kind of culture in your organization, you've got to pounce. Or you're not willing to admit you don't know everything. That's a big one. Vulnerability in a cultural mindset, right? Or we've had many CEOs as clients who simply wanted to save face in front of the board and therefore didn't do what was necessary and got breached, right? So this whole idea of safe face, no. Let's not penalize, let's empower that kind of culture of breach prevention. So those are some very, very, very high level culture ethos issues. But in addition to that, you've got a couple of other points. One, the executive team and board have to be brought up to speed to the same level. They have to be speaking the same language. And right now, very few organizations are there. Within that, the second point is the board has to speak not just the same language, but be executing on the same policies, cybersecurity policies, as the executive suite. I've yet to meet a board that is being held to the same standards of cybersecurity policies as an executive suite. And that's a problem, right? Because every single one of those board directors has access to pretty much everything, right? Confidential information, et cetera. Those two need to be leveled out. But there are also a couple of mindset shifts. I'll just name 5 very quickly. First, you've got 3 organizations you're managing: physical, digital, cybersecure. Most boards and C-suites are still managing all 3 of those through the lens of the physical. Think about that for a second. Second, achieving a culture of cybersecurity does require a repeatable process. We'll talk about that in a bit. Third, directors and officers must think like a hacker. Right? Think about it. It's organized cybercrime. So we need to start introducing that hacker mindset into every part of board culture, board strategy, C-suite strategy, so on and so forth. Fourth, cybersecurity is not an issue of just cyber risk. It's an issue of innovation. And therefore, it's not an issue for the audit committee or for the risk committee. It's an issue for whether you want to form a cyber committee is up to you. I suggest that, but it's certainly a strategy committee issue. Also, just like you run SWOT analyses and stakeholder analyses for whoever, you've got to now include cybersecurity and more broadly cyber as part of that SWOT analysis, and forevermore include hackers as one of those stakeholders, right? And also, third point under that is you've got to introduce cybersecurity strategy into every functional area. So case in point, is your CFO looking through the P&L, every line item of the P&L balance sheet, and viewing it through the perspective of the hacker? That's a powerful exercise, okay? And finally, fifth, while the new national cyber strategy coming out of the White House is going to force you to start thinking about cybersecure by design technologies, good, not great. I need you to elevate with us. Elevate to cybersecure by design boards and C-suites. Right? And we'll talk about what that means shortly. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thanks,
Tons to say
Andre. Yeah, I think picking up on the hacker mentality, Mark, you touched on this a bit in your bit, but if you could just pick up on that and whether there are any lessons learned from your operational and policy time in government. I mean, now government and industry have more of a mandate to work together. So.
Right.
Picking up on the theme, in government we used to look at hackers and try to outsmart them, and now Andre's touching on that we need to pick up on that social engineering. Andre, you touched on that. What kinds of things can we learn here? And if you could just speak about the culture, the best practices of culture and government, of what we could bring.
So one of the
boards.
things we haven't talked about is on a board, you've got different committees. Andre just kind of tossed out some words there. Should you have a cybersecurity committee, or is that part of the risk committee? Do you take a standing committee and just have them address cybersecurity? That's a board question you're going to have to figure out with your organization. If you look at the government, since you asked about the government, it doesn't work any different than a large enterprise. I mean, a multi-billion-dollar type of thing, except they get to print money and spend it. If you're a business, you have to earn the money before you spend it. Other than that, there's not, not a whole lot of difference. For those of you who come from the DoD Uncle Sam world, you're very familiar with all the NIST standards, the SP 800 series, all the protocols we've got to go through. So we understand technically what needs to be done. We understand the threat, and we've built models going back to the 1950s. You can find evidence of, at least here in the US, of the federal government doing a lot of work to try and figure out, quantify what the cyber risk is. Even though we might have used different terms earlier, we called it information assurance. We've had all these other names, but it's still the same thing. But at the leader level, that hacker mindset, I don't think really has fully gotten started in government-type organizations until recently we began to see it. I know that 20 plus years ago when I was on active duty, the first time I saw a blue-haired, earring-wearing, black t-shirt hacker shows up in a secure facility, TSSCI, we're all like, oh my God, who let that person in? Not realizing that person held the key to everything we needed to know and gave us a whole lot of education. I've been going to the DEF CON stuff pretty much since it started. Many of you might have seen me at Black Hat doing talks and things, but we began to embrace, the DoD did, that we've got to talk to that community and understand what's in their mind. Other parts of the federal government have not done that. Your organization probably hasn't done that. When was the last time you had somebody who truly could be your enemy come in and give a presentation to your board? Here's how I think about going after you. Do you remember the movie Catch Me If You Can? It came out a lot of years ago. Okay, so in fact, on the flight out, it was showing on United Airlines. So if you're on United, you can watch it on the way home back from RSA. But the general thing was you had a guy who, Frank Abagnale, who figured out how to write checks and how to forge checks. This is before we had all the stuff today that prevent counterfeiting. But he got really good at counterfeiting. He could counterfeit uniforms, he could counterfeit badges. I mean, he was really good and almost daring the FBI to catch him. They ultimately did, and the FBI realized we've got to take that person and that mindset, and we've got to teach it to our people, leadership and down. Today, Frank Abagnale is a consultant for the FBI. He does talks and speeches. He works routinely with the leaders in that organization all the way down to the agent level. Does your organization do that? Do you find and recruit people who could have been or might actually have been your enemy, your adversary, and bring them into the boardroom and have them talk to your leaders? If you're not doing that, you might ought to think about doing that. Again, this is a non-technical approach. This is not about buying new software, new hardware, new AI, new all this buzzwords you see over in the Expo Center. This is about the mind and the adversary and what they're going to do to you, and making sure that senior leaders in your organization fully understand that. Give them the opportunity to ask questions. Why would you do this? What is it about me that is vulnerable? What is it about me that you would steal from me? These are awkward questions, but they're perfect for a board, because a board typically isn't looking at that. They're looking at the 90 days, they're looking at financials, they're looking at shareholder engagement, all the other things boards should absolutely be looking at. But salt and pepper it a little bit with some of this mindset and see if you can make a bit of a difference there. So that's kind of where I would go, and I've done this previously in other companies or other organizations I've worked for, and you'd be amazed at how much engagement you'll get out of senior leaders if they actually get to see and talk to the individuals, the humans, that are most likely to be their adversaries.
And one of the things that boards generally don't realize is just how many different hacker types are actually targeting them. Right? So if you're an average board director, you've got at least 18 hacker types that are specifically targeting you. Do you know who they are? Do you know why they're targeting you? Do you know what digital crown jewels you specifically have and have access to as part of your organization, your family, etc., that are causing you to be that target? That's an analysis that is parallel to the organizational analysis, which is also why we're bifurcating this issue between CISO versus board and C-suite behaviors and strategy. That has a whole different calculus to this.
So Andre, picking up on all of this, so Mark, you've opened the door on what kinds of things we can do. Andre, you just touched on this as well. It seems like we have to take responsibility as board members and CEOs. So Andre, picking up on that, what should we as board members and CEOs be doing specifically in order to get past this huge malicious threat wall that's out there?
Yeah, so we're obviously going to go ever so deep into this because this is what we do for a living, but I'll give you a bit of a framework to think with. So first of all, really start separating the issue of What is CISO's responsibility versus board and C-suite's responsibility? Today we're not going to cover the separation between board versus C-suite, but obviously there are serious lines of division there. So if you're really serious about picking this topic up, by all means stop by and we'll point you in the direction of how to find out more, etc. But let's talk about the board and the C-suite side, right? It's very important for boards and C-suites to realize the CISO process exists, right? It's well defined. We know what we need to be doing, etc. Enterprise tech stack, cybersecurity, so on and so forth. But many boards and C-suites think cybersecurity doesn't involve that behavioral and strategy. Well, it does. So what does it involve? It starts with cyber acuity. Mark and I talk about this ad nauseum. Cyber acuity, just knowing as a board director, as a CEO, whoever, who is after me? Why? Who's after my organization? Why? Whom, therefore, do we need to be including in that board strategy? Why? Right? Again, elevating from physical organization to certainly digital, but then cyber secure, right? If you're not digitalizing your organization, okay, cool, your competitors will and put you out of business or whatever. But if you are digitalizing your organization, then obviously you need to be digitalizing, or rather cyber securing that digitalization on a one-for-one basis. So as you're doing that, what do you as a board director and C-suite executive need to be doing? So that cyber acuity at that cyber level of the organization is critical. That needs to start entering the board strategy, but not just strategy, individual roles and responsibilities. Something we didn't touch on before is in terms of those roles and responsibilities, every board director, every executive has a very specifically defined role. Do you know what yours is? Do your board directors? Because everything that I hear generally from prospect clients is, well, it's our head of risk, or it's our chairman that deals with it, etc. No, that's the wrong answer, period. But most still don't know that. So cleaning that up becomes very important as part of the process. Secondly, it is not about regulatory compliance. Okay, regulatory compliance will get you out of trouble, but it will not keep you breach-free. So unless your board and C-suite are executing on their tactical roles and responsibilities that actually has a chance of preventing a breach, regulatory compliance won't do you much. And you'll hear a lot about SEC rules coming out, etc. You'll be very disappointed as far as how far they're going to go in terms of actually preventing a breach. Note that. So then in terms of process, let's say you've mastered your cyber acuity, you've mastered your own individual risk and how it pertains to the rest of the organization, right? Secondly, you've got to look at your individual cybersecurity, therefore. Why? Well, because professional, personal, and family risk are being used to target your organization. So your individual board director no longer can tell you, well, that's my private business. Yeah, okay, fine. So you as the CISO cannot, right, you cannot engage in the privacy of your board director's home, but you've got to require that they clean up their individual cybersecurity act. Okay, so what does that include? Well, that's a process too. First of all, you're looking at general risks, executive risks, behavior, and technology. Why? Executive risks are critical. This is why we don't start with general employee cybersecurity. We're looking at executives specifically and what risk they face, because once you've covered those, you've pretty much covered your average employee. So that's one analysis. Another is that professional, personal, family. Another level is, right, every device, your travel, etc. So, and then you bring it into corporate strategy. So what corporate strategy does your board and C-suite need to be involved in? Geopolitical cyber response strategy is not the CISO's job. Regulatory policy cyber response strategy isn't your chief legal officer's job. It's board and C-suite in general. Your cyber insurance, your board governance, etc. Those are critical to develop. And then you need to have every board director live out their own individualized action plan that incorporates all of these issues and speaks the same language across every board director, but indeed from an individual person's point of view.
Thanks, Andre. We're running low on time. Mark, any final thoughts that you think we should come away with?
I think we've covered a lot. I do want to just pull that thread real quick on
Please.
compliance, because how many of you believe compliance is the answer? Don't raise your hand. I know it's an easy trap to fall into. If I've checked all the blocks, and I have to do it, obviously I don't want to be fined, I don't want a regulatory action taken against me, so I got to do that. But your adversary can read those compliance checklists just as well. And if they know that you're compliance centric, they'll go find things that aren't on your checklist, and that's what they'll go after. I mean, it's a no-brainer, right? So be compliant, but go well beyond that. And then work with your regulators. Have them understand what else you're doing beyond compliance. Other steps you're taking, other things that they may want to look for. Many of you work in sectors where you depend on your peers, your competitors, and your near peers. They need to be just as cyber secure as you are, probably for supply chain reasons. If they get breached, you're right behind them. We're all milliseconds apart from each other anyway. So it's in your best interest. And that last piece, and Dana, you mentioned this early on, and that's cross-talk and sharing. Boards need to talk to other boards. If they're just siloed and only worried about your organization, that's not good. They need to be talking to other boards. And what are y'all doing for y'all? I'm sorry, I'm from Alabama. What are y'all doing to protect yourself? What are you alls doing to protect yourself? Working together, sharing information at that board level is so important. It's not just, again, about the CSOs or CISOs. So again, we can go on forever. I do hope we can get to some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. At this point, we would like to invite the audience to please come up to the microphones and pose your questions to our panelists.
Hi.
Sorry, state your name.
Oh,
and where
hi,
you're from.
Mark D'Antona. Thank you very much. Y'all were just talking about compliance, and I'm coming from a smaller organization, and a lot of those C-suites and boards, they think of compliance as what they need to do and then move on. How can I, as a cybersecurity leader, help them understand that compliance isn't enough?
What I've done in the past is I'll dig into a company that's fully compliant but got breached anyway. And just when I do a presentation to the board, I'll say, and they'll know ahead of time. It's not like I'm pulling a card out of my pocket. But let me show you what happened. And yes, we are compliant, but board, I need your help, I need your dollars, I need your whatever, so we don't become like them. And particularly if they're a near peer competitor and they know that they could be targeted, that's what I do. I mean, others may have other approaches, but it's so unfortunately, so easy to find evidence of other companies that have been breached, those who are fully compliant, and you just lay it out and say, here's what they did. We can't do that, we're next. That's how I do it.
Analyze the individuals in that organization. What do they not know that they should? Show them that gap alongside the same issues.
Yeah.
Great question.
Thank you,
Thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much. Next question.
Hey, good morning.
Morning.
Anthony Harris. I was coming across a report from a study that spoke to the CEO report on cyber resilience, and one of the mindsets was the CEO must be co-responsible, not just accountable, for cyber resilience. And that means being actively involved regardless of reporting lanes. I want to know what you think, how would that impact cyber resilience and the ability of the organization to survive a breach? If that mindset changes, do you think that would help? Because you spoke to some of that stuff, but CEOs see themselves as accountable. They don't see themselves as co-responsible, because if they saw themselves as co-responsible, they see themselves as co-responsible for revenues. They see themselves as co-responsible for expense management, but never cybersecurity or cyber resilience. What do you think?
Great point.
It all, again, goes back to show them the gap. There are enough case studies that show why the CEO has to focus on cybersecurity, right? So case in point, I could give you, just from venture capital and private equity industry, case studies where, whether it's a startup or a large corporation, gets breached because the CEO wasn't keeping everybody in check, and therefore all shareholders lose the entire ROI. That speaks to the CEO's responsibility, right? ROI, revenue. So you're putting the entire company's well-being at risk. That's not the CISO, that is a CEO job. So again, get into their mindset. You care about revenue? Cool. Let me show you an analysis of how revenue gets decimated if things go wrong.
I do like, don't go away. You use the term resilience, which is a term we don't often use enough.
Yeah.
Being resilient to a cyber attack means you're going to get hit by one. We all understand that. what's the time to recovery? How quickly can I get back in business? If I have a breach, if I have ransomware, whatever. A lot of organizations believe in all or nothing. I'm just going to put up all these barriers and it's not going to happen to me. The more mature ones, and this is where I think you're going, your CEOs need to understand, breaches will happen. Doesn't matter how much money you throw at it, doesn't matter how much culture you throw at it, they're going to happen. What is my preparedness for that? How can I be resilient? How can I get back in business as quick as possible? That's a neat way of thinking because it also applies on the physical side. If I have a fire or labor dispute or whatever, that same thinking that they're already doing for these other perils maps over to cyber very nicely. And that's something we can also coach our CEOs on, is that don't be afraid of this. This isn't just a pure tech. I got the tech, I got that as a CSO. But I want you, Mr. CEO, to think of it as a peril to the business, just like all these other perils. And let's talk about resilience. So it's a great opening line if you want to have that conversation with the boss.
But don't go away for 30 more seconds. I love Mark dearly, but I take serious issue with the whole idea of we're just going to get breached. Fine. We as industries and governments currently suck at breach prevention, but we've got to get better. We've got to rise up above that. So how do we do that? We have to pay attention to that side of the issue and plow at it.
And I love you like a brother too, but you're going to get breached.
I get it.
You're going to have a fire in the kitchen. It's going to
I
happen.
agree with Mark. It's just a function of time,
That's right.
effort, and money.
That's
I'm
right.
not
And if
saying
you
we
have
won't.
the right crown jewel,
Yeah,
there's not enough defense
exactly.
that will stop them.
Exactly.
Excellent. Thank
But-
you. Well,
Thanks.
let's move
Great
to the
job.
next
Gotta
question.
be moving.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Joy Beeland. My organization is helping to secure the defense industrial base, and the compliance part of this is really intriguing to me, knowing how ineffective that truly is. I do have a question, though, on the part about the board members and executives being targeted personally. Do we have any statistics for how many breaches have been caused because of board members or executives? I haven't seen those actually anywhere. Any research that we can point to for that?
Nothing that's believable enough quite yet.
Okay.
Yeah, a
That's
lot
a
of
shame.
anecdotal.
A lot of
evidence.
anecdotes.
I think our experience is that a lot don't want to, because they're, holding stock. They don't want to go out to the market and rattle markets or rattle their investors or rattle their, even startups don't want to. They don't want to expose what's there. And
That's
that's an issue that CISA in particular has been after,
Yeah.
saying this is why you need to come to us within this number of hours because you can't hide anymore. Like the hiding is putting everyone at risk. So I think that's why we can't get good data, is because people haven't wanted to be public about that data.
Right.
Put it
Thank you.
differently,
Yeah.
there's data out there that gives you some idea of why and how much that's been the case in around 2014, 2015, 2016. But the innovation curve in cybercrime is moving so rapidly that we don't even know what we don't know.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am, thank you.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Eric Torres. You mentioned something very interesting about getting the board and executives to think like hackers or get into the hackers mindset. What would be the first step to getting them to do that, or activities or something that how can one approach them to make that happen?
Yeah, so whether you're the CFO, chief legal, etc., look at your current corporate strategy. And if you're the CFO, look at every single line item of your financial statements and start putting together a strategy, a response strategy for, how could hackers go after this part and this part and this part? Present that to the board. Start playing those kinds of exercises and then see how that cyber organization is working together, right? What is the CISO doing within that? What is the chief legal doing? Chief business development officer has a large role, right? That's a privacy role, it's a data role, customer data role, etc. Most chief business development officers would look at me like I have 15 different heads saying, I have a cybersecurity role, what are you talking about? So that kind of exercise is where I would start.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. We have another question over here.
Hello, my name is Robert O. I have one question for both of you, Marcus and Andres. So in terms of business priorities, all the board members look at their business priorities, and cybersecurity, unfortunately, is not usually their top priority. How do you actually, instead of talking about fear-based approach of, hey, you will be breached at one point, instead of that fear-based approach, how do you actually go about ensuring that cybersecurity becomes a one of the top priorities for the board? I've worked for 7 different global organizations, and as much as those organizations talk about cybersecurity as their priority, sometimes due to other business priorities, it's usually not the top priority, right? So how do you ensure that happens instead of working on this fear-based approach? How do you encourage the boards to look at this in a different way?
Yeah, unless you're the board of a security company,
Yep.
yeah, I don't know that it's going to be your top line. It's
That's
shareholder value, particularly if you're a publicly traded company. That's, I
Yep.
mean, that's why boards exist, right? Is to-
Right.
But your point is well taken. How do I at least get it in the top 5?
Right.
And so there are other risks that they're worried about.
Yep.
And it becomes an educational question. If you're the CISO or the CSO or the CISO, in some cases, those individuals don't have access to their boards. That's a problem. So question number 1 is, do you have access to your board? Are you invited to the board meetings? Are you sitting at the big table and allowed to give presentations? If you're not, you need to change that, make that happen. Once you're there, then relationships with the board members. As a technical person, they don't necessarily want to hear all the techie. And
Yep.
in my military world, I served on a general staff at one point. I'd answer to a 3-star commander. I'm just a lowly major. And he didn't want to hear all this technical stuff.
Yep.
But once I started putting it into 3-star language and saying, here are the things that using their language, all of a sudden I had their attention. And when I started talking about how this would make them more effective as a leader, I had their attention. And I learned over time that for those of us who constantly talk techie, we're not invited in very often. But if you can learn how to talk business or government or military or healthcare or whatever it is that you're doing, now you're resonating with the board members and or the leadership, and they're more willing to talk to you, give you a place at the table. So that, I think all of us have to learn that lesson. If we're too technical, we're allowed to show a slide. We're allowed to say, yes, we are not breached this week or this month or this quarter. And they ask you to go sit down until you can translate into language that they understand. That's where I would go with it.
And Andre, I mean, you have a perspective on this too. Any comment picking up on what Mark said?
I think Mark covered it pretty well, but I will say it is what it is, right?
Yeah.
You have to know what your risks are and take it from there. You can talk ad nauseum about, yes, you've got a cyber org that you need to be maximizing, but frankly, in terms of priorities, most boards are not going to look at that before they look at a lot of other things. So if it works, fear-based or not fear-based, I'm not a proponent of fear-based. I'm a proponent of, let me just understand my risks.
That's right.
Right? Because once I understand my risks, it's not so fear-based actually. Now I understand what hackers are out there. Okay, cool. Now I can start doing my own analysis. Cool. Now I know what to tell my employees. All right, so we need to run through this strategy differently, that strategy differently. And all of a sudden, I can now translate that to my CEO and my board in terms of this is what we're expecting in terms of ROI changes, et cetera, because we are espousing some of these doctrines, if you will.
Great, thank you.
Thank
I
you
think,
very much.
Andre, you said it earlier, you and Mark said you got to empower people, not disempower people out of fear. You have to empower and see it as a way to take control of the company.
And really start thinking, that whole role-based approach. Every executive, every employee, every board director has a role that's group-specific, right? So board or finance committee or whoever. That's individual-specific, right? Chairman or whoever. And issue-specific, incident response or whatever it is. Once you start bucketing into that, it becomes an easier exercise.
Any other questions? Okay, well, I think, thank you, gentlemen. You've given us an incredibly useful perspective and challenged us to think about the necessity of our own responsibility to create that cyber secure leadership and have that set the culture tone from the top down, I think is what Mark said, and that, there is something that we can do to protect our companies and our ROI and minimize this risk. Just to recap, I think I've heard, first, you don't have to resign yourself to breaches are inevitable, although there's a bit of debate there. Within that debate, there's a lot that we can be doing to close the gap. Second, from my notes here, we shouldn't rely on technology alone to save us. I mean, I think we need to empower our technology as well. Like, if we as leaders are not taking the responsibility, we're not giving that technology the best possible chance of defeating the enemy, as we call it. Third, I think I heard you say that by understanding and internalizing these roles and responsibilities, Andre, that we can make an action plan is what I kind of sussed out from what you were saying, that we can create an action plan, both strategic and tactical, and we can push back and win. This is not a losing battle if we look at this part of the equation. And if all of us work together to adopt this approach, as Mark, you said, boards share information, government and private sector, yes, we're sharing more information, but boards and peers sharing more information on how to defeat this problem. Working together, we can also empower that approach. So I indeed believe that if we tackle this, we can be stronger together. I believe that the audience had excellent questions. I want to thank you for that, and thank you for joining us
Dana?
this morning. Yes?
Real quick, because
Yep.
we still have 1 minute. I just wanted to
Yeah,
thank
please
everybody
do.
who's still in the room. I realize some people like to
We're wrapping it up.
go
now.
catch the coffee before everybody else does. But one thing we didn't talk about, I just wanted to make sure everybody hears this. In the educational world, I come from a university, we're rethinking education completely, and we've come up with this thing called cyber informed, and then fill in the blank, engineering, whatever. Is your board cyber informed? Is that also another way to think about this? Is they're business people generally, or they're government people generally. But just like we're trying to we can't crank out enough cybersecurity professionals, InfoSec professionals, computer scientists, whatever. But we can change the understanding of everybody else, from engineers to doctors to lawyers to board members. So can they be cyber informed? And maybe that's your biggest takeaway from here is how do you work to get them as individuals to do their individual jobs on those boards, leadership roles or whatever, being fully aware of the cyber threats. And they as individuals kind of embrace that. So I think that it's kind of a new theme we're beginning to see, along with AI and blockchain and all these other buzzwords that are out there, is can we cyber inform people? And that may be where this will take us. And we can do this again next year.
Yeah,
talk about
and I
what
think
we
that's a
learned, right?
great point.
So Mark calls it cyber informed. We call it getting your board and C-suite cyber ready.
Cyber ready.
Are they truly ready to lead on cybersecurity in your organization? Are they on the same page? Are they speaking the same language? Do they know their roles? Do they know their role in strategy? What strategies they need to be focused on, etc. And the lady in the front had a wonderful question that I didn't have quite an answer to, so I'll answer it in a different way. One of the ways that you want to empower your board to internalize this issue of you yourself can be a target is start presenting some case studies, right? We have a lot of case studies, just on our website, of CEOs and boards that were unfortunately taken for a ride by hackers, by nation states, whoever, because their CEO was pick your poison. They didn't care enough about a culture of cybersecurity, and so we show how that domino crumbled, etc. Or they didn't think that their individual life was at stake, and that cookie crumbled. That's it. Once you start showing those kinds of examples, even though we obviously don't have clear statistics yet, we don't, as a world, not even in the US, do we have that level of required disclosure for, as Dana said, CEOs and boards to want to voluntarily disclose this, but you can start pushing that envelope.
So yes, so cyber informed,
Cyber
cyber ready, everybody has a role, every individual board member has a role, not just the one that's appointed to look over the CISO and cyber operations, but everyone has a cyber role. And if everyone does their role, we will indeed be stronger together. So I think that's a great way to close the session, and I want to thank everyone for coming today.
Thank you. Great
Enjoy
questions,
RSA.
too. Thank you.